just gonna
Yeah.
I'll be perfectly honest, I wanted to kill someone for a long time. It's like an urge, and it was kind of a time that I could get it out.
Mount Vernon is shaken to its core by a strange act of brutal and outright violence carried out by a group of dysfunctional and sickened teenagers. These youngsters belong to a group called Disciples of Destruction, and they will stop at nothing to live up to their names. When one of their plans falls through, they are left unprepared for what happens next. In a town largely known for peace and absolute tranquility, a family made up of a father, David, a mother, Kimberly, and their daughter, Jamie, make their home here in a nice neighborhood. Jamie's dad was an engineer, while her mother was a pediatrician. One day, in October 2009, just like he had done on a number of occasions, Dave had to make a business trip. As a precautionary measure, he had a security system installed for cases of emergencies. Unfortunately, the security system malfunctioned shortly before his trip. Considering the safety of the town, the family didn't see the need to fix it, and so Dave left his family with an inoperable security system. Before the family retired to bed that night, Kimberly briefly discussed her plans for Jamie for the next day with her husband. At about 4 a.m. the next day, a terrified little Jamie calls 911. She appeared frightened and barely whispered as she tried to get help. As a result of this call, a police officer is dispatched to check out the address. Upon arrival, he begins an immediate survey of the house's exterior until his eyes catch a moving object. However, this wasn't just some random item. It was a human, a little girl, Jamie. Without waiting for backup, the officer quickly rushed in to find a terribly injured and maimed Jamie as some part of her foot was missing. She was also struggling to speak as the words just did not come out. The officer carried her outside, and she managed to tell him her name. With the arrival of more officers, they made their way into the apartment and are sick to the stomach with the sheer level of evil done to Kimberly in her bedroom. They also find entry points where the assailants entered through, as well as evidence of missing jewelry. Meanwhile, a friend visiting another friend of his in Brookline, a town just 20 miles from Mount Vernon, had met two excited friends. These friends freely spoke about a mother and a child that they had just eliminated while some of their friends watched them. The two excited young men are teenagers, Christopher Gribble, a 19-year-old, and his partner Stephen Spader, a 17-year-old. The next day, Christopher is invited over for questioning. It is important to state at this point that Chris had no business fitting the profile of a ruthless and evil person. This is because he grew up in a religious home with hard-working parents. He was also a member of the Eagle Scouts and even had plans of becoming a missionary. He later enrolled in the United States Army Cadets Corps in his bid to become a Marine. Although he did well in his academics and conducts here, he later failed out of the program. It was at this point that something within him snapped. After his arrest, he is taken in for questioning, and the detective starts out by asking what he had been up to 2 days before then, which was when the dastardly act was carried out. The detectives ask how his day went on the day the crime was committed. He responds by telling the detective that he and his friend Stephen, including Quinn and Bill, had gone to Walmart to get some items but couldn't find them, so they left and went home.
As you get closer to Saturday evening now, you guys making plans Saturday night, weekend night, you're going to go do something?
We were going to just all chill like at Walmart or something.
Mm-hmm. Who do you chill there with? Who usually hangs out with you guys?
Me, Steve, Billy. Quinn's a friend of ours, but he couldn't get out that night.
Okay.
He tried and, he ended up having to stay home.
Okay. Is that what you guys actually end up doing?
Well, we went over to Walmart, but Billy, I guess, had stuff to do, so he didn't get there till later.
Eventually, they went to the house of Autumn Savoy, a fifth friend, where they spent hours watching a TV series titled Dexter. Christopher goes on to describe the movie, which is really the story of a violent vigilante who attacks and takes the lives of evil people.
The basic principle, I think, is he's like addicted to like blood and stuff. He really likes blood, and I guess he people too because of that, which probably sounds really bad in a homicide investigation saying we're watching that, but I'm being honest.
The police turn to investigate Stephen, and he comes across as a defensive young man.
I just went downstairs and discovered that someone at the mall, you and somebody else went down there and pawned some jewelry. Is that right?
I didn't. My friend did. Chris did.
Chris did. You were with Chris and you guys went there. Somebody recognizes you as being there.
Okay, I was there.
Okay.
We went down to go pawn some stuff at the jewelers. I don't know why that's illegal.
No, it's not.
No,
Part of what we've done, we're trying to create a timeline of where you were so we can talk. You told us, what was it, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, you said you were at Walmart on 101A in Amherst. But we're going to go back. We're going to check that. Okay, he says he was here. He was there. Okay.
Stephen is an adopted child who had to be taken away from his drug-addicted mother. As a growing child, he was lovable and a great child until he grew into his teenage age. Autumn speaks about him and his sudden change in behavior.
I just knew Steve was getting worse from talking to him. And then at some point, he went away. I don't know exactly where. When he came back, he was not the same person.
He grew violent and began having problems at home and with his loving parents. After spending thousands of dollars on him, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and severe depression.
He wasn't that emo kid who had issues at home. He was this kid who wanted to be a gangster, a big drug dealer. Like, it was odd because somehow he always managed to have money for drugs. He would sneak out at night. He'd quote-unquote borrow his parents' cars.
He and Christopher share some history together as Boy Scouts before they went their separate ways and reconnected recently. The detectives return to Chris, and the confrontational aspect of the interrogation begins.
And right now, I'm going to tell you that there are some other stories that are being told. You better think long and hard right now about what happened this weekend. Okay.
The detectives ask what he and Steve did on the day the crime was committed, and he repeats his story of being at Walmart and leaving sometime later that night. The detectives are, however, not buying this, as they are convinced that he and his friends were present at the crime scene. At the realization of this, Chris says he and his friends may have driven by the location, and he acts scared. He says the thought of being in the area when the crime was being committed scares him. This is because the criminals may have found him and attacked him as well.
Let's say you were on that road that night.
Assuming I was, that scares me shitless.
It should.
However, none of this appears to be true. For starters, Chris had only recently formed a fraternity of some sort known as the Disciples of Destruction. All 4 of his friends, apart from Autumn, were members of this group. They were interested in wealth and brotherhood. However, the initiation rites included breaking in and stealing from a house. The detectives turn on the heat in their interrogation as they press him for answers.
You were here for a reason, okay? You want to know what the other guys are talking about? They're not talking about cigarettes. So you better start thinking really hard and pull your head out of your behind and start telling us what happened on Saturday night, because it's not looking very good for you. People are talking about something different than what you are telling us. This was Saturday night. This wasn't 3 months ago Saturday night. This was Saturday night.
Initially, they try to make him see that he was probably a bystander who was present at the scene but didn't carry out the act. This is to make him speak about what he knows. When this fails, they switch the tone of their questioning and call him out for being the actual predator of the evil act.
Stop telling us, Chris, about why you guys went into that house. Because right now, it isn't a question if, it's a question why.
They later informed him that Jamie survived and will be able to identify her attackers. If this statement has any effect on Chris, it is negligible. It turns out that some of the other friends have been speaking to the cops and giving them more information than Chris is letting out. Eventually, he refuses to speak to the detectives, but will later change his mind to speak with them, and we will come back to that later. Billy, on the other hand, doesn't hold out for too long. As soon as the detectives inform him about their knowledge of his whereabouts on the day the crime was committed,
Billy, the information we have is that you were there.
he agrees with them. The detective prods him to give more details, and he tells them about meeting up with Chris at Walmart after Steve invited them.
Okay, so what happened at that meeting? He told me that we were going to Walmart to meet Chris.
They eventually reach the home of the Cates, as he stands guard as the rest of the gang tries to find a way in.
Trying to figure out how to get in. Okay, they said they got in. Now I was over standing somewhere, looking out, watching some people.
The gang finds a way in, and being one of the smallest, they lower him in to open a side of the house to grant them entry.
You're a little guy. You know, how tall are you, Billy? I'm like 5'2". 5'2", how much do you weigh? 96 pounds. 96 pounds. Little guy that would be handy to have at a cellar window, right? The opening there wasn't a big opening, right? For the cellar window? Did they lower you into the cellar window? Yeah.
Billy is really uncomfortable discussing this, and it's obvious that he's trying to block out the memories of that fateful night. Quinn also tells his part of the story. He mentions Stephen calling him to meet them at Walmart by 12 a.m. Although he tries to lie by telling him that his father just caught him, Stephen will have none of that and insists that he joined them at the designated spot.
There were text messages, there were calls. I told Stevie that my dad had caught me going out, which I didn't even attempt yet. My dad was downstairs, so I said it very softly into the phone, but he said, "Your dad caught you?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "I don't care if your dad catches you. I don't care if you walk out the front door. You have to get out tonight." Chris, on his own part, has now agreed to confess and begins a chilling description of the things that happened that day.
A few days ago, we decided that we were still low on cash. We couldn't manage to get jobs, and we were going to try and get another robbery. We weren't sure when or how we were going to do it. Saturday morning, when I was with Steve, he told me that him and Billy had been cruising around and had found a house out in Mount Vernon that looked reasonable enough, that it was out in the middle of nowhere, and we were thinking we were going to go in there.
As an alibi, they all agreed to go to Autumn's house so that he could state this if or when called upon by the police after their crimes. Chris also mentioned Stephen's desire to rob, as they were all low on cash.
And it was just me and him together in the car.
You and him, meaning?
Me and Steve.
Okay.
In the car. He said, "Yeah, we're just going to go in there, grab some stuff. If anybody's there, we're going to have some fun." I agreed. We could do that. That sounded good.
He says that when they arrived at the house, it was quite difficult getting in till they found a basement window. Bill was lowered in, but ended up getting trapped in the basement.
All the doors were locked. We finally found one basement window we thought we could get Billy into if I could get it open.
Yep.
I used the black mechanical assist knife that I own to cut the screens. There were 2 screens between us and the window. And I tried to cut the frame out of the window, but ended up breaking the glass. At which point I basically bashed in the window, not the glass, but I managed to break it off of the handle that was on top holding it down. We couldn't get anyone else in any other way so far, and so we started sliding Billy in. Billy got in and was because he went over to the basement door and thought it was locked because he pushed on it instead of pulling. And so he was stuck in the basement and they were trying to get him out.
Eventually, they found another way to get in by taking out the air conditioner.
Steve had the idea that we could take the air conditioner out.
Okay.
So I cut the panels off from around the side.
Yep.
And we moved the air conditioner over.
Stephen had told them to rob the Cates as it looked like a soft target. He also said they would eliminate anyone they found in the house, and Chris agreed to this. In preparation for this evil, Stephen, Chris, and Bill had gotten knives and a machete.
We all had pocket knives. I had found a machete that my father owned, and Steve had mentioned he liked machetes, so I brought it along.
Okay.
And there's a Boy Scout knife, a straight knife, about 4 or 5 inches long.
When they got in, using the opening created by removing the air conditioner, they turned off the power so that the motion detectors in the house wouldn't trigger while they searched for what to steal. They soon found an iPad, and with the light from it, they continued their search. Soon they got to the master bedroom and found the sleeping mother and child.
He went around to one side of the bed where the girl apparently was sleeping. I started to circle around to the other side in case something happened. The mom sat up in the bed, started asking who was there, what was going on, tried to turn on the lamp and it didn't turn on.
Stephen, as if possessed by some demon, rushes and begins to hack at the bed with the machete.
When she did that, Steve started hacking at the bed with the machete.
Chris soon joins him as they bring down sheer terror on the innocent women.
But I heard him hit the mom, and so I dove in and stabbed her a few times in the chest. Steve was just hacking away. He totally lost it. I was controlled, but I didn't really feel much of anything.
While this is going on, Quinn and Bill watch helplessly, most likely stunned by the level of violence being carried out.
What were Quinn and Billy doing?
They stayed by the door. They didn't do anything. All honesty, we did everything.
Afterward, they rob the house of the jewelry they find and leave with the idea that the two ladies in the house are no more. Thankfully, Jamie survives and calls the cops. Billy also states that although he had a knife on him, he never planned on using it.
Never anybody, obviously. So I wasn't planning on it.
He remembers that after the evil done by Chris and Stephen, Quinn had turned on the light, and he saw the true extent of what had just happened. Something that might linger with him all his life.
It was pitch black, okay, and then someone turned the power back on. I don't remember who, I don't remember why, but the lights came on, and I saw that. And you saw what? Billy, I know it's tight, I know it's tight. You know, I don't know. Did you see the woman? Yeah.
After all this was done, they dropped off Billy at Walmart, where he left his car, and dropped Quinn at home before proceeding to Autumn's place. They arrived looking super pumped and excitedly told him what they had just done. Autumn didn't initially take this with any form of seriousness, as Stephen was known to make boastful but usually empty statements.
I was looking at him, and I was like, "What do you want?" And he's like, "Nothing. I'm just amped. I mean, I've got a massive adrenaline rush right now." I was like, "Why?" He's like, "Oh, we just killed 2 people." Like, he said it really nonchalantly, and being Steve and his stories previously, I was like, "Yeah, okay." You know, I didn't believe a word of what he said.
However, when they showed him evidence of their loot and other crimes, he began to panic.
I was scared because, as far as I knew, I was sitting in a room with 2 murderers.
Stephen also threatened to eliminate him if he ever gave him up to the authorities.
"I love you like a brother, but I'll kill you."
Moved with fear, as he claims, he helped them to dispose of the evidence from the crime scene in the river Nashua and buried the pieces of jewelry in the woods close by.
Steve and Chris were trying to decide who was going to throw the stuff into the river. And Steve's like, "Autumn, why don't you just throw it in?" I was like, "All right." I was extremely disturbed.
The 2 evil and boastful friends later go off to Brookline to meet up with a friend, Kyle. Here, they tell him about their crimes with glee. Fortunately, Kyle is sane enough to let his mother in on this, and she calls the authorities. With all confessions in place, all 5 of the boys are found guilty and sentenced accordingly. Quinn gets 30 to 60 years for his part. Stephen gets 20 to 40 years. Autumn gets 5 years. The unremorseful and sick-minded Chris and his evil partner Stephen are sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Stephen even refused to appeal for parole, as he believes that he is the sickest person on the planet, and no one should ever have to encounter him. Autumn was subsequently released on parole in 2015, while Quinn will be eligible for parole in 2024. If you enjoyed this episode and like to see more stories on true crime, then be sure to subscribe to our channel. This way, you'll be notified every single time we upload new videos. Thank you for watching.